Districts Council Development Management Committee meeting. I'd like to make you aware that this meeting is being live streamed by the Council's YouTube channel. Please ensure that any mobile phones are switched to silent. So welcome to those of you who are watching at home. I would also like to outline some housekeeping arrangements. If you wish to speak, please indicate to do so to myself. To enable your microphone, please press the middle button, which will turn green, and the microphone will light up red at the top to indicate that this has happened. Please remember to press the middle button when you have finished speaking, as it is particularly important that all members use their microphone so that the audio can be picked up through the live stream. In the event of a fire alarm sounding during the meeting, please stand and follow the meeting administrator to the evacuation point outside of the building. Firstly, do we have any apologies for absence?
There are no apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 1, which is the minutes. Do we all agree that these are a correct record of the minutes from our last meeting? Thank you. Moving on to item number 2, members' interests. Are there any members that would like to declare an interest in relation to any items on the agenda this evening? Councillor Mockball.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to declare that I'm a ward member for the first item, Nursery Gardens, and I'm also a town councillor. But I will be participating in the discussion.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to declare an interest under item 3E. As I know the applicant, I will withdraw from the meeting at that point.
Thank you very much. Are there any other declarations of interest? Councillor Slade.
Yeah, my interest is on item D, as I'm a town councillor in St Neots and on planning.
Thank you very much. Any other members? In that case, we will move on to item number 3. Before we start, item 3C on our agenda has been withdrawn. Therefore, I have a motion to put forward to the committee that the application be not determined because the applicant has withdrawn the application. I'd like to propose from the chair that the item is not determined. Do I have a seconder for this motion? Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. All those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Thank you. That's approved, Chair.
So that is approved. We'll move on to item 3A on the agenda, which is St Ives, and I will pass you over to Lucy Beckman, one of our planning officers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the change of use of amenity land to form garden curtilage and the erection of boundary fencing at 40 Nursery Gardens in St Ives. This application is referred to Development Management Committee because the officer recommendation of refusal is contrary to St Ives Town Council's recommendation of approval. Next slide, please. The application site is occupied by a 2-storey detached dwelling in the built-up area of St Ives. The subject dwelling and surrounding dwellings in Nursery Gardens were granted planning permission and built out in the 1990s. The surrounding area is characterised by similar detached 2-storey dwellings set back from the road with front and side gardens and driveways. The subject dwelling is orientated side on to the road, as you can see. There's a parking area to the front with front garden consisting of low-level planting and a tree. The side boundary of the site adjacent to the road currently comprises a solid brick wall. This is set in approximately 2 to 2.5 metres with grass and shrubs between the boundary wall and the pavement. As shown by the light grey dotted line on the block plan here, the existing brick wall begins at the rear elevation of the dwelling and stops at the rear of number 40's garden and the boundary with number 39 Nursery Gardens. The proposal looks to incorporate approximately 30 square metres of land into the garden of the application site. This would involve the demolition of the existing brick wall, removal of the existing soft landscaping, and the erection of a 1.8 metre closed boarded fence. As set out in the report, given that this is not usable open space and is therefore of low public value, the proposed use of this land as garden associated with number 40 would not conflict with local plan policy. However, officers do consider that this section of land serves a purpose as a green visual buffer between the built form and hard surfaces of the surrounding development, and it contributes positively to the street scene. The proposed closed boarded fence would measure approximately 14 metres in length with half a metre gap for around 6 square metres of replacement soft landscaping. Our design guide looks to avoid closed boarded fences such as that proposed, which face the public realm, because in most cases this form of boundary treatment is poor in appearance and durability and fails to contribute positively to the appearance of the surrounding area, and particularly when sited in prominent locations such as the application site. It's considered that due to the design material and prominent siting of the proposed closed boarded fence, this would be a visually dominant feature to the dwelling and would be harmful to the visual amenity and character of the street scene. It's not considered that the level of landscaping proposed would be sufficient to mitigate the harm created. I'll show you some more photos to provide some context. So this shows the front elevation of number 40 with driveway and front garden. And then the next photo, this the side elevation. The proposed fencing would begin roughly where the chimney is, and then it would extend down the side of the property, finishing at a similar point as the existing brick wall adjacent to number 39. And then the last photo we've got is looking west towards the exit of Nursery Gardens. So for the reasons set out in section 8 of the officer report, officers are recommending that the application be refused. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 2 speakers on this particular item. And our first speaker is Councillor Nick Wells for St Ives Town Council. You'll have 3 minutes in which to address the committee, and if you press the middle button, then we'll be able to hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, please sit down if you wish
Okay,
to.
thank you. I believe the application came to St Ives County Council in July 22. The Town Council Planning Committee reviewed the application as normal, obviously looking for reasons why recommending refusal might be necessary. We noted that there were no comments from the neighbours of the resident number 40. We noted that the height of the fence is similar to that of the existing wall. We noted that the amenity land was, as has been said, of low value and doesn't really serve a useful purpose on the estate. And that the only houses impacted by the change really are on the street zone are the small number of houses in the cul-de-sac part of Nursery Gardens. Beyond number 40, I think there's about 4 or 5, 6 houses maybe on the far side. So the number of properties actually impacted by the change would be relatively small. And so as a result of those deliberations, the Town Council Planning Committee recommended approval of the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this speaker? There are no questions, so thank you for coming to address us. Thank you. Our next speaker for this particular application is the applicant, Mr. Kevin Bulk. Welcome, and when you're ready, press the button and you'll have 3 minutes to address the committee. Thank you.
Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to address you tonight. I do find it, quite frankly, bewildering to be in front of you tonight to discuss a garden fence. In June 22, we submitted the application to erect a fence along a boundary with soft landscaping. I'd like to speak to you about previous applications, the planning officer's report and the impact on the street scene. The planning officer's report submitted fails to mention the President for approvals of fences adjacent to the highway across the district, something I have raised a number of times without a response from a planning officer. There are a variety of applications approved across the district, including a similar proposal approved by this very committee on the 26th of September last year at 9 Ditchfield, Somersham, for an officer of HDC. The fence element of the Somersham proposal doesn't materially differ from our application. The planning officer's report fails to mention the front-facing part of the fence, which will be entirely screened by existing mature shrubs and plants, much higher than the proposed fence line, all of which we will be retaining. You will not see the fence as you drive down Nursery Gardens, which is a cul-de-sac. St Ives Town Council Planning Committee support the proposals and state there will be no visual impact to the street scene. The Highway Authority raised no objections to the proposal. There are no objections from our neighbours. I received correspondence from a local ward councillor who also supports the proposal. As noted in the officer's report, the proposal is acceptable with regards to the impact on residential amenity, flood risk, biodiversity, highway safety, and the principle of a change of use from amenity land to form garden curtilage. The fence will not be immediately obvious for anybody entering Nursery Gardens, and it will not result in an overly harmful and incongruous addition to the street scene. There is a variance in boundary treatment evident, including substantial closed-board fencing as you enter Nursery Gardens on both sides of the road, as well as throughout the estate, so it is not an unfamiliar feature in the locality. We chose the materials for the fence deliberately to be natural and blend into the existing vernacular of Nursery Gardens, as noted in the report. We are committed to soft landscaping, the gap between the fence and the public path with species of plants and shrubs which will enhance biodiversity. Landscaping is shown on submitted plans and can be secured by condition. No closed board fencing in the public realm is not a strict planning policy requirement. It's a design guide, merely makes recommendations. I respectfully request the committee to approve our application for our family, which is consistent with other proposals across the district. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this particular speaker? There are no questions, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we will move on to questions of clarification for the officers. Thank you, Councillor Jordan. Are there any questions of clarification for our officers? Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Thank you. Yes. In section 4.2 of your report, you're describing previous applications, and you mention an application which was disposed of. I'm not familiar with that term in planning terms. What does that mean?
I'll answer that, Chair. When an application hasn't had any activity on it for a period of 6 months or more, then the authority can finally dispose of an application. That means they write to basically withdraw the application from the public register under Article 40(13) of the Town and Country Planning Procedures Order 2015. Thank you.
Councillor Wakeford.
Thanks. I just wonder, excuse me, if officers would like to comment on the extent to which there's agreement that the proposed fence wouldn't be visible in light of the advice in the officer report about the visual buffer provided by what is there currently.
Sorry, would you mind just clarifying the question?
Do officers agree that the proposed fence wouldn't be visible from the road as was suggested by the applicant just now?
I think the applicant was referring to the front section of the proposed boundary treatment, and there is shrubs there at present, which presumably are to be retained. I think what officers have highlighted in the report is the side elevation view, the 14 metres in length adjacent to the pavement.
Councillor Sanderson and then Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Thank you, Chair. When I visited the site, I saw other examples of fencing, which will be very similar to this, at numbers 30 and 31. Appreciate that's in a different part of Nursery Gardens. So what would the difference be between those and the one that's being proposed here?
I'm afraid I'm not aware what sort of circumstances that fencing came about. If it's if it's not adjacent to a highway, it could be permitted development. There's a limit to 1 metre in this particular location under permitted development, and that's part of the reason why we're looking at this application as well as the change of use. We've acknowledged in the report that, of course, there are some examples, and the applicant has highlighted those to us. Having been to site myself, the majority within Nursery Gardens are set significantly back from driveways, apart from the one example at the entrance of Nursery Gardens, which the applicant's referred to. I believe that dwelling is much older than the site we're looking at here and the surrounding development. And this sort of visual landscape buffer was part of the original scheme, and is there to serve a purpose.
Could you clarify within the design guide what it actually specifies about a boundary fence or a boundary wall? Okay.
Yeah, of course. So page 174, the advice in the second paragraph. If the side or rear walls are in the public realm, then these should be either solid wall or high hedge or a combination of both. And then if you turn on to the next page, it recommends principles that should be followed. And number 6 is closed boarded fencing should be avoided in locations facing the public realm. This includes communal and semi-public parking areas such as rear car courts.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Jordan.
As far as I'm aware, it's in the applicant's ownership. It's outlined in red on the location plan.
Councillor Davenport-Ray.
I have a follow-up question to what Councillor Sanderson was asking. In section 7.14 of your report, you address the issue that the applicant has brought up of other fences in the neighbourhood, and that the post-boarded fence as you enter Nursery Gardens from St. Audrey's Lane is set approximately 5 metres away from the highway. How does that compare to the application that's before us now?
So what we're looking at with the proposed is a 0.5 metre gap with some landscaping. That's approximately 6 square metres of landscaping, and that's directly adjacent to the pavement and then the road. As you approach Nursery Gardens, that I believe that's the fence, a gap, pavement, and then a wider gap, and then the road.
Are there any other questions of clarification? As there are no other questions for our planning officer, we'll move on to the debate. Who would like to start the debate for me, please? Councillor Niche.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's one of those strange ones when you look at it and thinking, yeah, as the gentleman said, why is it in front of us? But of course it's in front of us because it's differing opinion between St Ives Town Council and the officers themselves and their recommendations. And I can understand where the officers come from, because you do, if you flick through the design guide, it is quite clear as to why, although it's a guide, we do follow the guides quite not religiously, but they're there for a purpose. And I feel that having a fence that moves across to the footpath, and the idea of that is actually what you end up, so the road, and what it ends up is that very abrupt finish as opposed to the softer area that goes behind it. I mean, it's a difficult balance because I'm guessing the owner and the applicant, should I say, probably keeps it neat and tidy, etc., and they just probably want to move it across to the side. I'm not sure which way I go, apart from I do know, when you go down there, it does give it that element of wider opening space and softer aspect. So I shall leave it at that at the moment, Chair. I'm not going to do any recommendations at the moment.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Is there anybody else that would want to contribute to the debate? Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. As so often at these meetings, I largely concur with Councillor Niche. I think Nursery Gardens is lovely as a street to walk down, as I've done, and the green buffers in the street are significant to that visual aspect. The application, as has been said, in a sense, wouldn't be here at all on the basis of HEC officer advice if it wasn't for the town council having recommended in favour. Otherwise, I presume it would have been handled under delegated authority based on the recommendation here. In which case, it would have been swifter and it would have been declined. I can absolutely empathise with the application, with the applicant's aspiration, and yes, it does not seem a big thing compared to a lot of what's on our agenda tonight and a lot of what's on our agenda at these meetings more generally. But like Councillor Niche, my mind is open, though I do tend to feel, given that we do, as he rightly said, have a design guide that we seek to use to inform our decisions and our development in the district. I think that, as officers clarified earlier, the suggestion in the report that the proposed fencing would be a visually prominent addition to the street scene is supported by what we've got in front of us. So my mind's open, but I would, I think, be minded towards taking the advice in front of us. But interested to hear any other contributions from colleagues first.
Are there any other councillors that would like to contribute to this discussion? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say I'm struggling to find a lot wrong with this application. I mean, the recommendation on page 17 says prominent sighting within nursery gardens. Well, you'd have to be going to the cul-de-sac within the cul-de-sac of nursery gardens. You'd have to be going there or exiting from that part of nursery gardens really to significantly see this. I don't think it's particularly prominent, and I can understand the applicant's frustration that they feel that they're just simply trying to make this look better, but they are, I think, as the applicant said, they are looking at some landscaping as part of this as well. I'm not really sure I can find a lot to turn this down on. I know that we have the design guide, but that is guidance. I'm mindful of that, but I probably need to be persuaded by colleagues that there are some significant problems with this, which I don't think there are at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Is there someone else that would like to contribute their views on this particular discussion? Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, I would happen to agree with Councillor Sanderson's point of view there, because I cannot see, it's right down the end of the close, and really I can't see that there's a great deal of infringement onto neighbours or anybody else. We haven't had any objections, as far as I can see, from neighbours, so I'm more inclined at this stage to look for approval.
Thank you. Councillor Mockbull.
Thank you, Chair. Can we just get some clarification from the officers? Would there be any alternative sort of boundary that the applicant can do to?
Chair, what I would have to say was we have to assess the application before us. So you were looking at what's submitted at the moment rather than any alternatives.
Thank you. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, uh, if the vegetation had been trimmed back, like the first or the section, there is a section that's quite low, and it's only the larger section of bushes that are rather overgrown. I should imagine when this was built and designed as it was. It's got the brick wall and a few shrubs along the footpath. I do feel if you took away all the shrubs and just left the brick wall, it would look rather stark, but not as stark as if you removed all that wall, all the shrubbery, and then put a close boarded fence, which it doesn't really, I don't think, fit in with that area. As it was designed and built, it's, to my mind, that's good. But I do think that putting a close boarded fence up a half a metre from the path is not going to help the visual aspect of that area. So I'm rather swayed to go along with the officer's recommendation, Chairman, and propose we go along and refuse it, if you'll accept that.
I will accept that. Is there anyone else? Councillor Davenport-Ray.
There are a few considerations here that led me to agreeing with the officer's opinion. The first is around, as Councillor Butler say, how close the fence would end up to the walkway compared to other places around the neighbourhood. For example, the one that's mentioned in our report is 5 metres, and this would be half a metre. The other has to do with maturity of green spaces. The more mature, even very small green spaces are, the more able they are to act as stepping stones for biodiversity in the neighbourhood. And I also agree with Councillor Butler that the maturity of that space and the way it looks now contributes to the overall visual amenity of the neighbourhood. And so I'd like to second Councillor Butler's recommendation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davenport-Ray. Councillor Tevlin.
I'm minded to actually go for approval of this application because I believe that due to the lack of representation from other people and the fact that the design guidance is guidance, that actually I concur with just the councillors on the table who would actually approve it. So.
Councillor Dew.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, I think it's a difficult one, and I can see what the applicant's trying to achieve here. However, the design guide isn't just guidance in the sense that we can take it or leave it. It's a document that we've approved at this council and actually should take notice of. If it was just a design guide, actually, that we didn't take any notice of, we'd have no need to have it in the first place. So I think saying that it's a design guide, so therefore it's only a guide, ignore it, is actually wrong. And I think we need to take notice of it. It could be we could say that we felt that it did comply with it, but I think we need to take that fact. I think Councillor Butler hit the nail on the head on here to a degree. I mean, it was designed to create that space and gap, and if you bring a fence that close to the path, it is going to make a visual difference. It's you know, a difficult one, and but as I say, but I can see exactly what the applicant wants to achieve and why. So I can probably formulate an argument in my head the other way if I need to, but I'll stick with that one for now.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dew. So we have a proposal by Councillor Butler to refuse the application and a seconder by Councillor Davenport-Ray to support the refusal of this particular application. All those for refusal of this particular application.
Sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
And those against?
1, 2, 3, 4.
And any abstentions? No abstentions. So that is a refusal of this particular application. We will move on to item 3B on our agenda, which is in Somersham, and we will welcome our planning officer, Lewis Collins, to come and present this particular application to us. Thank you very much. Councillor Dew, could you turn your microphone off?
My pleasure.
Thank you, Chair. This application proposes a change of use to create 6 gypsy traveller pitches with the siting of 1 mobile home and 1 touring caravan per pitch. The application is referred to the committee as the officer recommendation of approval conflicts with the parish council's recommendation of refusal. The site is roughly 225 metres northwest of the edge of the built-up area of Somersham and is accessed by a private track off Park Hall Road. The proposed development does not affect any designated heritage assets and the site is at low risk of flooding. Since the submission of the application in December 2021, the site has been occupied by the applicant group. Fencing has been installed to separate the pitches and crushed materials have been laid to form a temporary hard surface. This aerial image shows the pre-existing condition of the site as a paddock. To the east are 9 residential dwellings and their gardens. To the southwest, there are now 7 gypsy traveller pitches with permanent planning permission. The boundary trees and hedges have been largely retained, and existing access into the site at the southeastern corner has been utilised. This slide shows the proposed site plan with 1 mobile home, 1 touring caravan, and the laying of hardstanding per pitch. The northernmost 2 pitches are combined into 1 larger pitch for 1 family group. The application is accompanied by a personal circumstance and gypsy status statement. It is considered that the families occupying the site meet the definition of gypsy and travellers for planning purposes. Each family of the applicant group have young children who are either in full-time education or will be enrolling soon. One of the applicants has a chronic illness which requires refrigerated medication and regular visits to the hospital to manage the condition. These circumstances suggest a permanent base is required, although the applicants have stated their intention to continue their travelling lifestyle in the future, which is reflected in the provision of a touring caravan on each pitch. This is an image of the access from Park Hall Road to the private track. This is a photo looking north towards the site from the adjacent agricultural field. This photo was taken from Park Hall Road with the site in the background left of screen in relation to the houses to the east on the right of screen. This photo was also taken from Park Hall Road and shows the site in the background in relation to the existing gypsy traveller pitches behind the hedging. This slide shows the view towards the rear of the site, including retained trees. This photo was taken from Park Hall Road further north, the other side of the existing dwellings. There are minimal views of the site from this side. These photos show the situation at the site as of January 2023. The site is in a largely temporary condition pending the outcome of this application. A site development scheme is recommended at condition 4 under section 8 of the report, and this would address matters such as the re-landscaping of the site, drainage, lighting, and ecological enhancements. The main planning reason for the parish council's objection is overdevelopment of the site. However, officers consider that the proposal is of acceptable density. The recommended conditions include a restriction on the occupation of the site to those who meet the definition of gypsy travellers for planning purposes, and restrictions in relation to the number of caravans at the site, visitors' caravans, commercial activities and vehicles, and the removal of permitted development rights for outbuildings, walls and fencing. These conditions would prevent intensification of the site without planning permission. Overall, it is considered that the proposed development is in a reasonably sustainable location and accords with the local plan policy for new gypsy traveller sites. While the development would increase the number of gypsy traveller sites in the area, it is not considered that this would dominate the nearest settled community or have any significant adverse visual or residential amenity impacts. The recommendation is for approval subject to the conditions set out in section 8 of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have two speakers for this particular application. We have Councillor Richard Sutton from Somersham Parish Council. Welcome, and please be seated if you would like. If you press the middle button, then we'll be able to hear you on the microphone. And once you start speaking, then you will have 3 minutes to address the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening. Somersham Parish Council objects to this site on the grounds of overdevelopment. Those of you who have served on this panel for a long time will remember that we spoke on the adjoining site up the lane off Parkhall Road, and that was granted by this panel not on planning grounds but on humanitarian grounds because of an elderly relative. This site to us is unnecessary. If it's granted, it will be the 6th site we have in Somersham, which shows we are not anti-traveller sites, the fact that we already have 5 there. Also in the application, if you looked at the details, you will see that the applicants wanted to include the trackway as part of their planning application. As far as we're concerned, that trackway ought to remain an open trackway because there's already established site up there and it ought to be free to everybody to use, not have to ask permission to cross to get to your own pit. So really, it is overdevelopment as far as we're concerned. The applicant started moving onto the site a good time ago. We did raise it with planning officers who went down, and finally we now got this application which is part retrospective, and I do know that you take no account of whether it's retrospective or not. It is the application in front of you you have to consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for our speaker? There are no questions. So thank you very much for addressing us.
Thank you.
Our next speaker for this planning application is Patrick Casey, who is the applicant. Welcome, and please be seated. And when you're ready, you can press the middle button and you will have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for hearing me tonight. The land that we own in Parkhall Road, the track road that we use, we have consent to do so. We also have a right of way through the land of East Alala, which is the previous owner. Since we've lived there, our children, you know, a home is what we look for, a home is what we got, which we hope to do so. My children is in education. Everything is going absolutely beautiful for us so far. We're trying to achieve for it to be a home for us, which is what we want. Again, we are registered with the doctor's surgeries. We're in the schooling. My little girl is getting Star of the Week, which is just unbelievable good for us. So we're very, very happy, and we'd like to call it home. Again, I'm not the best with speeches, but I hope that you can understand my behalf, and thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this particular speaker? Yeah, we have some questions for you. Councillor Davenport Ray.
Thank you. I think you're probably a better speaker than you think, 'cause that was well done. But the application in front of us is for 6 pitches, and on each pitch to be 1 static caravan and 1 traveling caravan. Does that suit the family group that you live with now? Is that sort of the ratio that you're living in now compared to the application that's in front of us?
So sorry, what you mean is the 6 pitches that we have, is that sustainable for us?
I mean that 6 that are static and 6 that people come and go. Is that sustainable for you?
It's absolutely perfect.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Goulson.
Thank you, Chair. One of the representations we had from one of the neighbours in there was about a collection of rubbish and so on. What is it you've got in plans to make that so it's not a problem for your neighbours and obviously for yourselves?
So again, like everybody else, we'd like to pay for our bins. We currently use the recycling plant, which they allow us to do so. So we collect our rubbish every week and we bring it up to the recycling plant. And that's how we dispose of our waste. Yes, there is another number of travelling community that does live down the lane with us. And they, again, same thing, which we'll be most likely doing. We bring our bins to the end of the road, the bin man collects it. Job done.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for our speaker this evening? There are no other questions, so thank you very much for addressing us. Are there any questions of clarification for our planning officer? Councillor Davenport Ray.
Good evening, Lewis. I'm wondering if first you could address the question around the track and its inclusion in this application. How should we interpret that?
Thank you. So when the application was submitted, the red line location plan only outlined the parcel of land, which I think is shown in your reports pack as just that square without the access track. So it's a requirement that the site meets with a public highway. So throughout the application, we requested amended plans for the track to be included. This is also due to highways requesting upgrades to the access point, so it could be widened to accommodate the extra vehicles. So it wouldn't obstruct any vehicle movements. I don't think the applicants own the track, but they have permission, as the gentleman said, to use it.
Councillor Niche.
Thanks, Joe. I've got a couple here. One is talking about the waste. We don't seem to have that under conditions. Is that not normal under Egyptian traveller sites? We haven't got a condition of providing that there's an undertaking that bins will be provided and collected, etc., etc. In these conditions, are there? Would we normally put those in? Is it?
Yes, we've requested a UU for the bins from the planning agent. Understand that's in progress, and if it was if the recommendation was carried, then we could delegate that to the officers to finalise.
Again, right, thanks. So it will go in as one of those for collections. Okay, I kept flicking through and thought I'd missed it, but I'm not sure if I have. The next one really is on my complete lack of understanding of cesspit cesspools, because I was a bit confused in one aspect. I think it is on 5.3, if I've got the right number. It says HDC Environmental Health, neither objecting or supporting, but they're talking about there's more modern methods of removal of waste, etc., yet then we go and say we want to have it as a cesspit cesspool. Have we just not glossed over it, but we just accepting the fact that we're going to have a cesspit there? And because it also then says in another area is that if you then go to different types of waste, there's issues with noise. So I suppose what I'm asking is, are we happy that we're going to put a cesspit stroke cesspool in there as opposed to going to a more modern technical way of dealing with waste?
So I understand the cesspit was partly proposed because the applicants were proposing a temporary or permanent permission. So I anticipated it might be a temporary approval, say for 5 years. So they don't know what the most viable option is for foul waste. We did consult with Building Control after the environmental health consultation comments. Unfortunately, they haven't provided us with any comments, although in terms of the technicalities of cesspits, I believe it would be subject to the building regulations and Environment Agency regulations.
Oh, no. I'm on, I'm off, I'm on. Yeah, just think. And the last one really is just is a technical perspective on numbers, which as I see is really in general for Huntingdonshire, which I see has we've got quite a complex mixture in here of saying, you know, that our annual report says we've got plenty of pitches, and yet it also says, but actually we can't regard that. I don't know whether there's any update on how much due regard we should say for the districts, because obviously well, I've had information in the past that, you know, we have plenty of pitches within the district and therefore we don't need any more. Now, clearly, there's an indication in here that we do, and obviously from the applicant's perspective, they do as well. I just wondered where we were on that balance of the number of pitches we provide and should provide, etc.
Yes, so as part of the local plan, there was a Gypsy Traveller accommodation needs assessment, and the numbers from that have been met. Although since that date, there's been various appeal decisions which have discussed the legitimacy of that document. The outcomes are that the need has been underestimated, most likely. We've approved way beyond the targets of that. And our plan and policy team have confirmed that those numbers shouldn't be a ceiling in any way. We should continue to assess applications against our local plan policy as they come forward. In this case, we consider it's a sustainable location, meets the criteria of LP27, and no material reasons why to refuse it. In terms of numbers on the site itself, something that we could control by condition. I've listed a condition within section 8 of the report, which we could make more specific to more clearly reduce the amount of caravans to static caravans to 6 on the site with 1 touring caravan per pitch. That's just to enable us control and to prevent any intensification without further planning permission.
Thank you very much for that very comprehensive response.
I'd just like to bring in the Head of Planning for a comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just as a point of clarification, tonight we discussed about the removal of waste, and the case officer has identified that there will be there's a unilateral undertaking to be submitted. Just mindful that the recommendation as it's set out doesn't have regard to that. So as we proceed with the debate, we may need to be mindful to amend that recommendation to have regard to that, and clearly any other conditions that might emerge as a result of the debate tonight. Thank you.
Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, first of all, can I congratulate you on presenting this in a different manner as regards the conditions, because this is very understandable. Is this the first time we've done this like this? Because sorry.
No, we have done it on occasion, but in all honesty, the reason why we have done it in the previous format is because it then comes down to the wording of what is actually delegated on the night. So with that in mind, if we have the phrase conditions to include, it does mean that should conversations continue after the night but don't materially change the subject of the debate, we can proceed to issue the decision. Whereas by having all the conditions worded out, if we did want to have any flexibility, perhaps as an outcome of a discussion with applicants, we would actually need to refer it back to DMC. So with that in mind tonight, I think we just need to have regard to any other emerging conditions that we might be considering and that we might want to include, and just make sure we capture that in the recommendation or any delegation that might emerge from that as we conclude the conversation around the UU. Thank you.
Also, will this be considered or added to our permanent site allocation?
Yes, as part of the Gitana, as we call it, there will be full regard to the site. And just to amplify what Lewis set out tonight, clearly our pitches, they're not a ceiling, but we're also mindful too, as we prepare our new local plan and we have regards to the needs of the Gypsy and Traveller community, in terms of doing this assessment, clearly COVID presented challenges as well in that regard. So this will be a piece of work that is already in flight with our neighbouring authorities, and clearly as that evolves, that will become a consideration in future applications.
Thank you. Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Lewis, the main objection from the parish seems to revolve around overdevelopment. And I know with traveller sites that our usual assessments of overdevelopment are different than what they would usually be. How do we satisfy ourselves of the level of development of this site?
Thank you. So, where are we? Paragraph 7. Under the reasoning section of policy LP27, it states that sites that are small in size to accommodate a single family group are likely better to meet the criteria, although they must be of sufficient size to accommodate large vehicles. It is anticipated that new Gypsy Traveller sites will be in the form of small family-sized sites up to 4 pitches, although some larger sites that already exist or new sites of up to 8 pitches may be appropriate depending on local circumstances. So this site's 1 hectare in area, the proposal's for 6 pitches. That is considered to be low density, and that according to the comments we received from planning policy. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a recommended condition to ensure that that number is a maximum. The only intensification that could happen would be subject to further planning permissions. So I think it will depend on each site what's considered overdevelopment, but in this case, we consider it low density, appropriate to the character and appearance of the area.
Thank you very much. We will move on to the discussion on this particular application. Who would like to start on the discussion on this? Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. I think those clarifications in questions to the officers were helpful, but I think illuminated by that, for me, this is a fairly straightforward one before us. The specific objection of overdevelopment, as was touched upon in answer to Councillor Davenport-Ray's question, I think hasn't been made to a threshold that would make it defensible. I think refusing this on grounds of overdevelopment, we would be in some difficulty. So I do not wish to stifle debate. Speaking first, so I won't make a proposal at this stage. And as the discussion previously drew attention to, any proposal will wish to touch on the bins situation, but I'm very happy to make one in due course. But I'm certainly minded to support this, but interested in hearing what other colleagues raise first.
Thank you, Councillor Wakeford. Councillor Sanderson, and then we'll move on to Councillor Gawson.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Wakeford here. I wasn't really persuaded by the Parish Council's argument that this is overdevelopment, and I think the points at paragraph 7.49 really deal with that. I think it opens by saying the houses have large gardens which separate the application site from the houses by around 100 metres. They will retain significant visual separation from a small group of dwellings. So I think this is a relatively straightforward application. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. On this one, yes, it's a bit of a shock when you turn up at site and it's already there. But in saying that, it was very well laid out, I believe. The discussion that the applicant has put forward, they're taking on board things that we've talked about, the waste and so on. So with the inclusion of the UU to be added into the conditions, I would formally like to propose that if it's acceptable.
Thank you very much. Councillor Niche.
I will let you. I agree with the comments made here. I suppose my only concern when we talk about overdevelopment is that Somerset has taken quite a number, and obviously there's a bit of. I think we just need to be mindful of when these things keep expanding, and that the accumulation can sometimes get a little bit bewildering. But I think in this case, it's still within acceptance from my perspective.
Is there anyone else that would like to contribute? Councillor Dew.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree with my colleagues on this. I mean, it pretty much fits with the Catanarettes. Years ago, it was literally the districts were told what they were having each, and it's now moved on to needs assessment, i.e. what we actually need, rather than the outside bodies deciding what we are going to have. I think the thing that persuades me on these is if we get ones come forward and in terms of density, it's good. It fits within the criteria. If you look at the national policies from the appropriate bodies, the fact that there's 2 caravans per site, one of which should be permanent, one of which is a tourist. So we're not looking to go over that sort of limit. Sometimes on some of them we see some extra bits and pieces on there which are allowable. This one's not necessarily pushing for those, so I'm comfortable with it. And it generally fits in with what we've done. I can understand Somersham's criteria for saying that the overdevelopment. I don't think this site necessarily is in itself, but I think there is a thing here. Over the past 10 years, they've probably taken more sites than anyone else, and we ought to be seriously looking elsewhere in the district. I'm not saying we shouldn't allow them, because I think it's a good thing to do. But you do end up with the problem otherwise. The very thing you try and avoid, i.e. a mass in any one area, i.e. go back to Willingham, Cottenham, wherever it was a few years ago, where there was a huge site that was unworkable. You can get that by default if you're not careful, if you have too many turn up in one area. So I think, I'm happy with this one, but I think just to flag up in future when we're, perhaps even when we're looking at our next phase of our local plan, we ought to have some thoughts about how we deal with that. And I'm quite happy to support this tonight, though. Thank you. I'll turn it off this time.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dew. And Councillor Davenport-Ray.
I'm happy to second the proposal, given we do some thinking about where that unilateral bins element comes in. I guess it would be on condition 4, but also on condition 4, perhaps you can explain a bit more about I have concerns with artificial light in the countryside, and I think you've told me previously that that could be included. Condition 14 and 4 between them might cover that, but I just wanted to double check.
Thank you. So yeah, condition 4 is essentially a site development scheme for the permanent works to the site. As you will have seen if you went to the site, it's in quite a temporary condition at the moment. As part of that, I think the second point is the proposed and existing external lighting on the boundary of and within the site. This condition is worded from inspectors' templates for similar site development schemes. So we'd be looking to secure the permanent lighting arrangements for the site there. As part of that, we'd be looking to minimise lighting overspill and reduce the impact on the light into trees and hedges of ecological value. And condition 14 is essentially anything over and above what's approved as part of condition 4. So a bit of safeguarding for the future. Yeah, no external lighting other than that approved by condition 4. So there's a bit of long-term security there as well. Thank you.
Then on the bins, condition 4, part A, do we want to be more explicit about a universal,
So I think, sorry, we could, if it's the approval is carried, we could delegate for the officers to finalise the unilateral undertaking for wheel bins.
Okay, so we have a proposal from Councillor Goulson and seconding from Councillor Devonport-Ray with approval with a condition about unilateral bin survey.
Can I come in?
Yes, you may.
Members, just as you proceed, before you proceed to vote, so a unilateral undertaking comes under Section 106 of the Town and Country Planning Act. So if through you, Chair, the committee would be minded to support this proposal, I would recommend that the recommendation is amended to approve subject to completion of a unilateral undertaking and to delegate that to myself for completion alongside the wording, the final wording of the conditions to take account of some of the points we've raised tonight, and to also include a condition around the number of pitches in themselves that are actually being approved on this site.
Councillor Goulson, are you happy with that recommendation?
Yes, indeed.
Fantastic. So we will go ahead with that proposal with those conditions. All those for the proposal with the conditions.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. That's unanimous.
So that's unanimous and that has been approved. We will move on to item 3D on the agenda, which is a planning application on 5 Howard Lane in Amesbury in St Neots. And our planning officer, Maria Roseman, will present that to us. Please go ahead. Thank you.
This is an application for the demolition of existing outbuildings and erection of a 4-bedroom, 1.5-storey detached dwelling at the rear of 5 Howitts Lane, Amesbury, St Neots. The application has been brought to Planning Committee as the Planning Officer's recommendation of refusal is contrary to St Neots Town Council recommendation of approval. I will outline these reasons for refusal in the following slides. The application site is east of Howitts Lane and is within the built-up area. The surrounding area is predominantly residential. As you can see from this slide, the host dwelling is a Grade 2 listed building and there are a number of listed buildings in the vicinity. The site is located within the St Neots Conservation Area and the site is also in Flood Zone 1. The site comprises the rear garden of a Grade 2 listed building laid out in an L shape. The host dwelling is gable fronted with thatching to the front and rear 2-storey tiled roof section. The rear of the site backs on to the end of Laurel's Close. There is a collection of outbuildings to the rear of the site, including a shed, pergola and summer house, which are the structures to the top right-hand corner of the site. There is a legally protected tree to the southeastern boundary Now, this aerial picture was taken in winter, so you can't really make out the tree, but you can make out the shadow that's into the site of the legally protected tree. The application seeks full planning permission to demolish these structures in the rear of number 5 Howitts Lane and build a 1.5-storey dwelling. The proposed dwelling's access would be on Laurels Close, and 2 vehicle spaces with block paving is provided to the eastern front of the dwelling, where 2 inwardly opened gates are currently situated. There would be a 1.8 metre close-builded fence separating the dwelling's curtilage from the existing house. The rear wall of the proposed dwelling would be approximately 14.6 metres from the rear wall of the host dwelling and would be approximately 6 metres from the boundary. Here are the elevations and plans to the proposed dwelling. The proposal is designed to be L-shaped with a collection of pitch roofs, 1.5 stories in height, with dormers and roof lights. The proposed materials include brick, render and roof tile to match neighbouring properties, although given the proximity to the listed building and conservation area, full details of materials should be conditioned as part of any approval. There are varied roof heights, the tallest of which will not exceed 7.3 metres. The footprint would be approximately 10.6 metres maximum depth and 10.8 metres maximum width. So I'll move on to the photos. Oh, is it? Oh no. Oh, there we go. So this is me standing on Laurels Close with the site in the background. You can see there behind the white house, the TPO tree. And the next one is walking down Laurels Close. And the entrance is behind the hedging. So this is me standing looking onto the site with the timber gates that will be opening inwards. You can see on the left the summer house that is due to be demolished and also the shed to the right and the TPO tree there in the background. This is looking into the site with the summer house on the left and the shed to the right to be demolished. And this is looking from Laurels Close over to number 3. And this is looking out of the site opposite the road. And this is looking left onto a house that was approved in 2011. And looking onto that. So, yep, on that one. So I've put this on as a comparison so you can see the design of the proposed dwelling pretty much matches that 2011 dwelling there. It is noted that a dwelling was approved in 2004 on this site. However, the current application has a larger footprint than the approved dwelling in 2004, and this dwelling approved in 2011 was considered to have an acceptable impact on the setting of the listed building. There are concerns that the current proposal results in a cramped and contrived form of development, given the proposal would be 14.6 metres from the host dwelling and may cause overbearing issues to both the host dwelling and occupiers of the proposed development. The proposal would also be approximately 7.7 metres from number 3 to the north and about 5 metres from the boundary to 2A Laurels Close. The proposal also features a shallow rear garden between 6 and 7 metres to the rear. Turning to the front of the site, there are concerns regarding practical use of the 2 parking spaces to the northeast of the plot. Given the proposed dwelling is sited forward into the plot, 2.9 metres from the road, manoeuvring into and out of these spaces would be awkward and would likely displace parking onto Laurels Close. There are also concerns regarding the limited opportunities for soft landscaping and tree planting. Furthermore, no proposal has been put forward for the provision of covered and secure cycle parking as per local plan policy LP17. The requirement is 1 cycle space per bedroom, so 4 cycle spaces are required in order to comply with local plan policy. In this case, one of the most relevant considerations are the impact to heritage assets, given that the proposal is within close setting to a Grade 2 listed building and with other listed buildings within the setting of the site. The site is also within the St Neots Conservation Area. The St Neots Conservation Area Character Assessment notes that this area is characterised by large and irregular plots giving a spacious character, with the advice that in order to preserve the historic looser grain, further infilling should be resisted. I've taken a photo there at the bottom looking into the site, showing that the dwelling would be viewable from the listed building on the opposite side of the road on Howitt's Lane. While there are no objections to demolishing the existing buildings and pergola, there are concerns that the subdivision of the rear of number 5 Howitt's Lane would reduce the historic setting of the listed building and wider conservation area. These listed buildings, including the host dwelling, are surviving original buildings from the early 18th century, and the buildings, plots and property boundaries indicate the formation of historic Amesbury and St Neots. There are concerned that the proposal, by removing the rear boundary and approximately half of the plot of number 5, essentially transfers part of the conservation into the modern cul-de-sac of Laurel Close, effectively distorting the existing distinction between the historic part of Amesbury around the green and the modern development on Laurel Close. Furthermore, by introducing a modern design dwelling to the setting, approximately 14.6 metres from number 5, with its associated domestic paraphernalia and hard landscaping, with 1.8 metre close builded fence separating the site, there are concerns that the new development would compete with and be unsympathetic to the host and wider heritage assets in scale, design, materials and features to both the listed building and its wider historic location. This slide shows the site edge in red and the band of legally protected trees adjacent southeast of the site in green. Policy LP31 of the Huntingdonshire Local Plan requires proposals to demonstrate that the potential for adverse impacts on trees has been investigated and that a proposal will only be supported where it seeks to conserve and enhance any existing tree of value that would be affected by the proposed development. By virtue of the lack of sufficient trees information, the proposal fails to demonstrate that the development would have no detrimental impact to this legally protected tree and is a reason for refusal of the application in this instance. St Neots Town Council have recommended approval of the application, stating that the proposal improves the property, is acceptable in scale and pattern and makes efficient use of its site. However, officers view that the application has failed to demonstrate that the proposal would cause harm to the setting of the host Grade 2 listed building at 5 Howitt's Lane and the character and appearance of the wider conservation area. Further, the proposal has failed to demonstrate that it would not have a detrimental impact on nearby protected trees through the submission of insufficient information. In addition, the proposal would constitute overdevelopment with an awkward parking arrangement, and the application has not provided 4 covered cycle spaces as required by policy or provided a unilateral undertaking for the provision of bins. The proposed residential development therefore does not accord with the specific opportunities for development provided for within the National Planning Policy Framework, the Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act, the Huntingdonshire Local Plan and the Huntingdonshire Design Guide. The case officer therefore recommends refusal of the application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have 2 speakers for this particular planning application. First of all, we have Councillor Tim Weil from St Neots Town Council. When you are ready, you can press the middle button. That will start the microphone, and we will start your 3 minutes when you are ready.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm speaking on behalf of St Neots Town Council that we looked at the application originally within 4 days of the notices being sent out, and we weren't aware of the the numbers of residents who are actually concerned relating to the application, because I hadn't had a chance to get in touch with the town council. The application was then retabled for the planning committee. However, it ended up with a tied vote, which was left to the chair to make the casting vote, who wasn't aware of the earlier discussions because he hadn't chaired that meeting. So therefore, we ended up putting forward as an approval, but it was 50-50 at the meeting. And some of the town councillors didn't feel that the chair actually took into account the heritage aspects of the site, and a lot of the comments similar to the planning officer's concerns. Boiling down to the harm of the listed building within, the redevelopment within the curtilage of the listed building, and were distracted by the more recent 2011 contemporary building next door. Therefore, the town council put forward an approval, but it has its problems.
I would like to bring in our legal team.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think because the matter is before the district council tonight, because the town council objected, and acknowledging that you're authorised by the town council to speak on their behalf, if you could articulate the reasons, because it needs to be quite clear as to why it was brought before, or why the town council do object to the application, and the difficulties of talking about what the chair may or may not have thought is quite difficult, because as the decision maker tonight, these councillors need to know what material planning considerations are that mean that the town council departed from the officer's recommendation.
The planning officer is putting it forward for refusal, but the reason why it's in front of the DMC is because the town council had put it forward erroneously as for approval.
When you say erroneously, could you just explain? Because I mean, yeah, yeah, right, okay. But
Thank you very much for addressing us. We have another two speakers. So we have an objector who is Mr. Jason Thorpe.
Yes, hello there. Can you just confirm you can hear me?
Are you online?
I am. Can you confirm you can hear me? Lainey?
You're very faint.
Okay, let me see if I can. Is that better?
No, it's like a whisper.
I don't know why that might be the case. Bear with me 1 second.
Oh, it's okay. We can hear you now.
All right, great.
Okay. You have 3 minutes to address the committee.
Okay, fantastic. Committee members, and thank you for allowing me to talk with you with regards to this application. I speak on behalf of the residents of Laurels Close, many whom are elderly or who have lost faith in the planning process to date. Thankfully, HDC has seen fit to refuse this application. However, we find ourselves here tonight because St Neots Town's Council saw fit to approve the application. Just as an aside, the documentation that you have for this meeting lists St Ives Town Council as being the person who approved, which is incorrect. However, St Neots Town Planning met to decide the fate of Laurels Close residents within 4 days of residents receiving the letter from HDC advising of the planned development, without any knowledge of the residents who had at this stage not even been able to register our objections, as we were working to the HDC deadlines of rejection and not the town council planning meeting, which we were not even aware of at this time. A town council with little to no planning experience, no understanding of the town or district plans, and many of whom had not even visited the site to identify the clear inaccuracies of the plans submitted, and who considered the fact that no objections has been raised as the residents had no objections. A committee who then completely disregarded the flaws of the process when they were asked to review their decision by making 2 very clear statements. Firstly, they didn't want to set a precedent allowing others to challenge their decisions despite new evidence being presented to them following the application being returned for review thanks to Councillor Wiley. At the second hearing, it was clear that the chairperson, Councillor Maslin, had a clear agenda to approve the application.
Excuse me, Mr. Thorpe. Could I ask for your actual opinion on the application, please?
This is my opinion on the application.
That seems to be on the town council and not on this particular application.
Okay, so I would therefore ask that tonight you consider the reasons for objection from the HDC, who are experts in their field, and these objections come from Conservation Officer, the Landscape Officer, the Trees Officer, Urban Design Officer, and the Planning Officer, and the failure of this application to meet the policies of LP2, LP4, LP11, LP12, LP14, LP16, LP17, LP31, and LP34, rather than St Neots Town Council, who are not experts in their planning and who hurried through this application twice with total disregard to residents' concerns.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thorpe. Are there any questions for this particular speaker? There are no questions for this particular speaker. Thank you very much for addressing the committee. Thank you. We now have another speaker, Mr. Simon Richardson, who is the agent. Welcome. Please take a seat, and the microphone button is the middle button. And when you're ready, we will start the timer. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for the chance to speak on this application. Without dwelling too long on the nature of the Town Council's 2 recommendations of support for the application, I think if I just pull a few elements out of Marie's very comprehensive report. So we're talking about a site which is within the existing built-up framework of the town. So we're not talking about yet further expansion onto the greenfields surrounding the town. We're talking about a site with no flood risk from either fluvial or surface water runoff. We are talking about a site with a previous permission for a residential dwelling, which would of course require the subdivision of the plot. We're talking about a site with a recent approval from HDC for arboricultural work within the site. So I'm sure you can see where I'm going at. We're addressing both principal and technical aspects of the scheme. We're talking, as you've seen, about an actual form of property in terms of scale, design, detailing, materials, appearance, character, which would reflect the properties it would sit and be read amongst. It's certainly, I certainly agree with Marie and officers. The property would be read as part of the modern cul-de-sac rather than the green, which it has no direct relationship with. So hopefully that explains the design and detailing choices that inform the scheme before you. And then I think, mindful of the ever-ticking clock, if I just move on to the suggested reasons for refusal, and I'll for the ease of the way I folded my paper, if I work backwards, we've got a reason saying no unilateral undertaking for a wheelie bin was submitted. It was certainly prepared because I prepared it. I witnessed the applicant sign it, and I can't believe they then didn't post it. Whether it's in the post system somewhere, whether it's in the four walls of the office somewhere, we could have another one with you tomorrow, or if we had been notified at any point in the over 6 months of the application that it wasn't on file. So that reason can be, very easily dealt with. The fourth suggested reason is to do with trees. Again, we've got a site with a recent approval from HDC tree officer for arboricultural works at the site to facilitate the development. Again, no request for any further information in response to the application has been received. If it had been, we could have addressed it. Third reason, cycle stores, typically dealt with by way of planning condition, as was expected and said in the application here. If you're able to pull up a site plan, again, there's a blank gable of the proposed property with several meters towards the flank boundary. There would be behind the car parking spaces. That would be all the a very sensible place to put it. Again, as Marie, I'm sure will be able to confirm, during the course of the application, we've suggested making amendments to that. We were told we couldn't submit amended plans. And then very briefly, having already mentioned that there was a previous permission for the subdivision of the site, we've also got a reason for refusal talking about awkward and unusable car parking provision. Well, firstly, the local highways authority don't share that view. But secondly, again, it was suggested we could very easily simply rotate the orientation of the car parking spaces. That would seemingly address the concerns raised by the urban design team. But offer hasn't been accepted. So here we are.
Thank you.
Out of time, so thank you very much. Cheers.
Are there any questions for this particular applicant? Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to ask you a question about the application before us has a distance between the proposed modern building and the listed building of back-to-back 14 meters. How does that compare to the 2004 application, which was previously approved?
Short answer is broadly similar. The scheme, as you'll see, is actually articulated. Was previously it was more, if my memory serves me correct, was more correct, isn't it, Marie? It's more of a single block. So nearer in some places, further in others, but broadly similar.
Are there any other questions for this particular speaker? There are no other questions, so thank you very much for addressing us. So we will move on to the debate. Which of our councillors would like to start the discussion? Any clarifications for the planning officers at all? Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Thanks, Marie. I think it's a very good report. It's quite a complicated situation. You've summarized it well. But I just wanted to double check the modern building 2A Laurel's Close, that's very similar to the design in front of us. Was that building built on the original cartilage of a listed building as the application in front of us, or else?
My understanding that it wasn't, and it was acceptable because it had a lesser impact on the listed building. Yeah, it's further, sorry, it's further away, so it has less impact on the listed building.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Mockball.
Thank you, Chair. Can I get a point of clarification about the protected tree location and the lack of tree survey? And does this warrant refusal under LP 31?
So if you look at this plan here, this is a constraints map, and there are TPOs on the southern boundary of the site. In order to assess the application against the impact to the legally protected tree, we would require to have a preliminary, at the least a preliminary arboricultural impact assessment, and we'd also would like to see a tree plan and schedule of the trees there, which we haven't had in this application. So yes, that would form a reason for refusal under LP 31 because we don't have the information to make the assessment. The trees officer has raised an objection to the proposal because there is no trees information within the application. There is.
Thank you. Councillor Slade.
Yeah, can I ask about the residential amenity 745? Just to get an understanding what type of alterations would not be applied. So it talks about in terms of overlooking, it's acknowledged that the proposal would have intervisibility within dwellings opposite the site. It goes on to talk about, however, necessary to prevent further alterations or additions to the property.
Okay, so this paragraph here is if you were to permit the application, I would recommend that we remove permitted development rights in order to protect the amenity of neighbours.
I also ask about an archaeological survey because there's nothing listed. I'm not sure whether it's be standard within the heritage kind of area to warrant an archaeological survey.
Archaeological issues wasn't raised as part of this application.
Are there any other questions of clarification? Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, under 7.26, you state the application in 2004, there was little assessment carried out of the potential impact on the heritage assets affected as the approval was made under planning regulations, which predated the National Planning Policy Framework. I wonder if you could just explain that a little bit more, please.
So the 2004 application was of its time, so it was assessed against the policy that was available to the planning officer when they made the recommendation. Obviously now planning policy has developed, and so then we have to adhere to the legislation that we have now in terms of planning.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. Are there any other questions of clarification for our planning officer? Right, there are no more questions, so we will move on to the debate. Councillor Corley, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think the officer's got this one pretty much bob on. When we look at the application, the new dwelling, you know, it sits in what we'd consider a reasonable plot of now. I'm looking back at the host, the dwelling there. I wouldn't consider that plot correct for that dwelling, and it's it's part of a conservation area. It's with listed buildings around it as well. I wouldn't be able to support it. So I think the officers got this absolutely right. So I'll stop short from proposing, but that's where I'd be going. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors that would like to comment? Councillor Dew?
Keep it going. Yeah, I'm following on from Councillor Corney. I agree with his comments on that. You know, to my mind, it's a pretty straightforward application to deal with. You know, we have certain policies that are built around conservation areas and listed buildings and trees and preservation orders on, and actually it complies with none of them. So I have no great difficulty in total agreement with Councillor Corney on that. You know, the officers have got this one absolutely right, and you know, I think it's important, and the point was well raised by Councillor Gardner, to understand the previous application was much smaller and of its time and really has little, if no, relevance to what we're looking at today. So when you want a proposal on this, I'm quite happy to propose that we refuse it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other councillors? Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. I concur with Councillors Corney and Dew. I think there are 5 recommended reasons for refusal, even if some of them could be dealt with in other ways by condition. Certainly, reasons 1 and 2 can't. Officers may wish to comment on others, but likewise, I'm minded to refuse. Were there not hands, I'd be seconding Councillor Dew's proposal if he wished to make it, but I'll let Councillor Niche do the honours, perhaps.
Councillor Niche and then Councillor Sanderson.
We'll have to be careful on this one. Thank you very much. No, I mean, my comment, I mean, in some ways it does highlight a lot that we've said in the past about ensuring there's some adequate training gone down to town and parish councils, which I know is in hand, so that will be helpful as well. And also for developers to remind them, I suppose, that, you know, planners are not there, they're not employed by us to actually do the development application for them in one aspect. So there might well be missing items, but they should have supplied them. I mean, it's quite a clear checklist, and I had a quick look and thinking this was maybe on the cusp of checklist, so I'll defer to that one. And again, thank you very much for advising us to why previously, you know, the difference, because I looked and thinking, wonder why it was allowed in the previous applications were allowed, but of course, then you look at the dates thinking, oh, well, things have moved on. I think the planning officer has got this 100% correct for refusal. I think, yes, as Councillor Wakeford has mentioned, we know some of them could have, a couple of them could have been dealt with, but I'm happy to second, if no one has second, to propose refusal for this application in line with the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. If you look at the list of consultations, the first one, I'm not sure exactly what happened at the Town Council with this, but I think if you look at the Conservation Officer objections, Landscape Officer, Urban Design, and our Tree Officer, there's a pretty comprehensive list, isn't there? And I think, as Marie said, LP 31 conflicts with that because there isn't any tree info. I thought the report was very comprehensive and it's given us what we need here. Thank you.
And Councillor Davenport-Ray.
I'm actually a little frustrated that this has come before us tonight, given the information we've had from the Town Council. I think Councillor Wiley has done an admirable job of attempting to explain some of the differences of opinion on that committee. But in future, I would encourage the chair of that committee with his strong opinions to come before us to explain some of those opinions. And so I'm very convinced by the officer's report and all of the reasons for refusal, and I'm happy to support the refusal.
Fantastic. I have a proposal from Councillor Dew, and I have a seconder by Councillor Niche. So all those in favour of refusal, please would you show your hands?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13, 14, 15, 16. So that's unanimous, Chair.
So that's unanimous, and that has been refused. We will move on to item 3E on our agenda, which is a planning application for Alconbury Western, and that will be presented to us by our planning officer, Lucy Bateman.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is for the demolition of stables and associated paraphernalia and the erection of 3 dwellings, 1 pair of semi-detached 3 beds and 1 detached 2 bed with associated parking in the form of cart lodges. The application is referred to Development Management Committee as the Parish Council recommendation of refusal is contrary to the Officer recommendation of approval. The site is located north and west of Hamerton Road in the village of Alconbury Western, and as you can see, it directly abuts the conservation area boundary to the south. The application site is currently occupied by vacant commercial stables, a menage to the north, and associated hard standing. The site hasn't been used since April 2020, and financial information has been submitted with the application to demonstrate that the existing use is no longer viable. Please note that the aerial imagery is not quite up to date. You can see 50 Hamerton Road to the south, and there are now 3 dwellings in the curtilage of that building. So the application looks to demolish the existing buildings on site and replace these with 3 dwellings. As I previously mentioned, 1 pair of semi-detached and a detached property, all with double carports for vehicle parking. The proposed dwellings would have a linear form with rear gardens to the south. The proposal also includes soft landscaping, tree planting, and a balancing pond in the northeast corner of the site. As set out in the officer report, the principle of demolishing the buildings and the provision of 3 dwellings in this location is considered to be acceptable and on balance would comply with relevant local plan policies. The proposed dwellings would not be readily visible from Hamerton Road and would assimilate well with the new dwellings to the south and would be appropriate to the countryside setting to the north and the east. The Council's Conservation Officer does not consider that the proposal would result in harm to the setting of the Alconbury Western Conservation Area. So this plan here just shows the existing arrangement of the stable buildings on site which are proposed for demolition. And here we have the proposed plans for plot 1. So this would be the first dwelling in the row. This would be single storey with side and rear wraparound garden and a double carport attached to plot 2. Plot 2 would be a 1.5 storey dwelling. So it would have 2 bedrooms and a bathroom in the roof space served by roof lights. And then plot 3 would be at the end of the internal road. And that would be a similar design to plot 1. The proposed external materials for the dwellings is a mix of timber cladding and buff brick, natural slate and plain clay roof tiles. However, officers are recommending that the full details of materials be conditioned. Members will note that the Parish Council and neighbour representations have raised concerns regarding flooding. The application site falls within flood zone 1 of the Environment Agency's flood map. However, our strategic flood risk assessment identifies the area as being susceptible to groundwater flooding. The proposed includes a drainage strategy, and this includes a attenuation basin with swale, permeable block paving for the parking areas, and the access road would be gravel. And in addition to this, there's a storage tank between the turning circle at the entrance. And then to the south, you can see the approved development of 3 dwellings and the drainage strategy included as part of that application. And that is included in the drainage strategies for this application. So it's just to clarify that the location plan identifies the site to the south. Being in the red and the blue outline, indicating that this is in the same ownership. So officers are recommending that a condition be imposed to ensure that the drainage strategy for both sites, as detailed in the Sustainable Drainage Statement, is carried out in full and complied with. So the proposed development would be accessed via an existing vehicular access of Hamerton Road, which also serves the new dwellings and 50 Hamerton Road. This access is considered to be adequate for vehicles and pedestrians and has adequate visibility displays, and the public footpath runs down the length of this access. So here we can see the relationship between the application site and the development to the south. So in the right, you can see that's number 3, the old stables, and then just in the corner of the photo, that's the garage of number 2, the old stables. And this is part of the stable building. So this is looking north towards the countryside, and behind this building is the former menage. And here's some more photos of the existing stable. So this is the courtyard area within the U-shaped stable block. And then the former menage, which is roughly where the proposed internal access road would be. And the balancing pond would be in the far right corner with tree planting along the boundary. And then this is looking south back towards the stables, where the dwellings would occupy a similar position, but slightly further north. And then in the background, you can see number 2 and number 3, the old stables, and 50 Hamerton Road. And this is where the proposed access would join the existing access, and where the turning head would be with the drainage storage tank below. And then these have been included purely for illustrative purposes. So this aerial shows the relationship between the proposed development and the buildings to the south. And then lastly, this is an indicative 3D image of the dwellings, which would have a central porch feature with simple pitched roofs and timber and brick construction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will move on to the speakers. We have 3 speakers for this application. Our first speaker is Councillor Neil Morton from Alconbury Western Parish Council. Welcome. And when you're ready, you can press the middle button, and then your time will start when you start speaking.
The Parish Council were astonished to see that the case officer chose to recommend approval of this development. Last time an application was submitted for this site to the LPA report for the DMC recommended a refusal. Leading to the application being withdrawn on the day of the DMC, very little has changed from the original application, and to find that the LPA has now reached a completely different recommendation is bewildering. The DMC report for the previous application concluded that the principle to development this site for 3 marked dwellings in the countryside is unacceptable. The application before you is for 3 market dwellings in the countryside. I'll summarise some of the analysis from the original report, which was extensive compared to the brief summary in the report that you have in front of you, which was taken verbatim in many instances from the application. The reasoning that the case officer uses for justifying this application is that it meets LP9 and LP33. LP9 states a proposal for development on land well related to the built-up area may be supported when it accords with the specific opportunities allowed for through other policies of this plan, and goes on to say proposals for development on land well relating to the built-up area will be considered subject to the provision of policies LP10 countryside and later lists LP33 rural buildings as another policy. This development does not meet LP10. Why did the report in front of you not consider LP10 in the original application? The case officer determined that having regards to the built-up area guidance within pages 53 to 55 of the local plan to 2036, The site is not considered to fall within the built-up area of Alconbury Weston and not considered to relate more to a group of buildings than open countryside. The site is therefore considered to form part of the countryside. LP10 was applied, concluding that the development should be limited to the location of the existing buildings only and not encroach on the area that is presently the Menage. Even the current application agrees that the site is located in the countryside as defined in the development plan. The development was originally considered not to be in accordance with LP33, which is at odds with the current assessment. It was originally concluded that the occupiers of the stables were notified to quit 22nd of June 2020, and the application was submitted less than 2 months later. It's reasonable to conclude that the stable buildings were made vacant for the sole purpose of complying with the criteria of policy LP33. Horses continued to graze this site until late 2022. The case officer went on to say the proposed buildings are so different from the existing buildings that in the opinion of the officer, the proposals cannot be said to constitute replacement buildings, not least the stable buildings are being proposed to be replaced with stable buildings, but the scale, massing, appearance, materials and floor space are completely different. We request that you refuse this application as it is clearly not in accordance with the development plan.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of clarification? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Paragraph 5.1, your main comments there seem to be on the drainage system and maintenance, but you didn't mention that in your remarks. Could you just expand on that part of your objection?
Yeah, the drainage system, well, on the previous application for the three properties that you saw on the slide, the drainage system still hasn't been installed for that. We don't know what's happening with that. So the drainage proposal for the development that we're talking about now does seem a bit more detailed on consideration, but we just thought it was more important. Obviously, I've only got 3 minutes to, go to the local planning regulations.
Councillor Tevlin.
Also on 5.1, the council has also said issue with proposed development with the previous proposal of car parking and the use of overflow parking. Now, you haven't commented on that, but I was just wanting to know the impact and the use of car parking from the previous applications and approval of those applications in comparison to now, what impacts that will have on you and the application changing to not having that overflow parking.
Yeah, the parking is a big consideration, and again, referring back to the three properties that exist there, part of the planning approval was that there was, I think, 6 parking spaces. Well, they've now been, there's no sign of them on the new drawings, they don't exist. So the parking has vanished, and we've already seen issues with parking near the site on Hamerton Road, which is just around a blind bend. So it is going to be an issue.
Are there any other questions for this particular speaker? There are no other questions, so thank you very much for addressing us. Our next speaker is Miss Sharon Boyles. When you're ready, press the middle button and then you can address the committee.
The letter inviting me to this meeting today said that the report to the DMC would include a summary of my comments. It does not. All it does is provide a title for what my objection is, but it does not summarise what the objection is, nor does it provide a summary of the other 27 objectors' comments. It only states that residents are worried about flooding. We are all worried about flooding in Alconbury Weston and do not want another development contributing to the surface water runoff in times of heavy rain. However, we objected on many more grounds than this, none of which have been mentioned. All the case officer seems to have done is given you a summary of the application and say that you should approve it. I find this incredible, as the last case officer to investigate this development site provided a report that recommended refusing of application for so many reasons. Can I ask why this report is not referred to at all in this case officer's current report? I can't understand why there are two completely different views on this development from the LPA, where the development plan has not changed in the very short time between the DMC on the 21st of June 2021 and this application being resubmitted on the 4th of February 2022. The vast majority of the analysis from the original report would still have been valid. Why has it not been used or at least considered? This report is wrong for so many reasons. It lists many of the policies in the development plan, but not the one against which the principal development should be judged, LP10, the countryside. The report quotes LP9 but does not analyse the development against LP9 or say why it should be approved against this LP. The report says the application includes an economic report on the stables. No such report has been made available. The date the commercial side of the business closed is incorrect, and the stables continue to be used until late 2022, as evidenced in my objection. LP33 does not define use for commercial purposes only anyway. The figures proposed for the floor space have been lifted directly from the application and are false. If the correct figures were used, the increase would not be classed as modest. In the report on the previous application, the Council's urban design team, who have not been consulted in this report, stated that if the principal development were acceptable, then it should be limited to single-storey development and to the location of the existing stables only, and should not encroach into the menage in order to reduce incursion into the open countryside. Hardly any of this development sits on the footprint of the stables, and the height of the proposed dwellings is only 70 millimetres lower than those in the previous application. They're twice the height of the existing stables and 2 metres higher than the neighbouring bungalow. The case officer states that dwellings reflect the existing buildings on site. They do not, and they fail to mention LP10 and therefore does not justify why this application leads further into the countryside. When I read this report as a whole, what I cannot understand is why the case officer refers so much to the planning application for the adjacent site, but does not refer to the previous application site. Therefore, I have urged this committee to refuse this application due to its failure to meet Hunts DC development plan policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this particular speaker? There are no questions, so thank you very much. We have another speaker for this particular application, which is Mr. Adrian Bassel, who's the agent. Welcome. If you press the middle button.
Sorry, I prepared my presentation based on drainage, but I think that's not really the main issue here. I think on drainage, I was just pointing to the fact that the application is accompanied by a comprehensive drainage strategy which covers both sites, which is the 3 houses under development currently, which you've seen is pretty much built now, and our site proposal as well. So in there, he's got comprehensive justification, and you'll see the conclusion of that report is actually to provide for a betterment in terms of what's there at the moment is lots of hard standing, lots of building with no drainage and just surface water runoff. So what we've now got is a swale that collects the water and then goes through a series of filters and those storage tanks you saw, which means you don't get in the heavy storms all that water's backed up and stored on site. So you don't get the water running down to the brook and causing flooding in the excess. I believe somewhere in one of the representations, that's not been discussed tonight, there was talk about flooding coming off the road at the moment. That's because the drainage isn't in place. So, but that is controlled by conditions. So in terms of why that's not in place, then that can be now undertaken and is controlled by the planning conditions of that consent for the 3 houses to the front. Equally, the suggested conditions deal with all the drainage issues for the rear. So there's a comprehensive drainage strategy. Just picking up on the previous application was withdrawn from the planning committee because we sought to address the issues that were raised. I'll just try and paraphrase them. The first suggested reason for refusal was that there was no information talking about the permanent substantial nature of the building, which we now have a structural report. So we went away, did that, provided that information. The second was the fundamental issue, which was the site, the height and the form and the bulk of the buildings. If you look at the previous scheme, it's predominantly 2-storey. We've got the maximum height on the site goes from 5.4 metres to 6 metres. So 6 metres is at no higher than double garage, the 5.4 metres below that. So they are predominantly purely single story to look at, as shown by the images submitted with the application you've seen tonight. The other issue was in terms of design as well. The conservation officer wasn't happy with the scale. They are now. I believe the urban design team were consulted, but it's not public information in terms of the comments. And I believe they're happy. Reason for refusal previously was in terms of the water strategy, which we've now addressed. We've gone away and done a massive report and provided with all that information. And number 5 was there's no unilateral undertaking for bins, which you now have. So that's the context of the previous scheme. So we spent a lot of time addressing that. Just picking up on the previous occupants, sorry, the previous people with the delivery side of things were notified to quit. They weren't notified to quit. They were told that the business would be closing, and if anyone wanted to take over the business, they could, but nobody came forward. The overflow parking is a red herring. The overflow parking was for the stables, not the new housing residential development. So the fact that that parking is not there is irrelevant in terms of any issues that are happening in terms of on-street parking at the moment. Plus, you see from our scheme of development, we more than provide adequate parking for development proposed. I think that's picked up most points that were raised. If there's any points of clarification required, then more than happy to take them.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of clarification? Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Do you want to turn that off? Is that?
Thank you. Yes. The location of the site and the topography of that area does lend me to worry most about the drainage and being so close to the brook. So my questions are around the sustainable drainage statement and the concerns that some of the residents have raised around the connection to the site next door, and that being an essential element of the drainage plan for the site that we're considering now. So I'd like to hear more about that. But also the part of the drainage plan includes quite a large underground attenuation. Who would be responsible for maintenance of that in the future?
So the three houses at the front with the drainage strategy there, the report deals with both sites independently. So in terms of the frontage site, that's a strategy for that site and that works. And then we connect into that connection, but we provide for our own attenuation as well. So together they work as in unison. Again, controlled by condition, both on the existing consent and a condition that we apply to our new consent. So that will be enforced, as would maintenance, because I believe somewhere in the objection letters are talked about maintenance. There's actually a maintenance strategy in the report. So in that regard, that the property owners would be responsible for maintaining that, and that would be controlled by condition. So if there's any issues, that condition can be worded so it's in perpetuity, so that council can enforce that. But again, I would add that the issues in terms of flood is because there is no drainage and it's covered in hard standing and concrete. So the water just runs off down the road and onto the road and then makes its way to the brook or evaporates away. That won't be the case, and that's why the report concludes there will be a betterment, because we're managing that whole situation, which has never been managed before. Pre-development, the water run off the fields before.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of clarification? Councillor Mockball.
Thank you. Why haven't you done the drainage yet?
Because there was changes to the drainage system to make it better, is my understanding. The reason why this site is outlined in blue is because the applicant still has control over enforcing that legally. So as part of the developer's purchase of that site, there's a legal agreement which says they have to put in place the drainage scheme as approved by the local authority. So it's covered by the local authority and the legal agreement. So if the local authority don't take enforcement action, then my client will to make sure that drainage is in place, and he will exercise the legal rights to ensure it's in place. I believe it hasn't been, because it's been in the process of being agreed with the local authority as a separate application. What we've chosen to do is to bring the two together so they're coherent. So they are now. The solution is agreed and will be put in place.
Are there any other Councillor Slade?
Yeah, the drainage storage under the road, would that be able to take the weight of a bin lorry? I'm assuming that bin lorries will come down that route to empty.
Yeah, the drainage crates are substantial and will take that weight. So again, if that can be conditions part of the planning, but it would have to do that.
Councillor Brayton.
Thank you, Chair. Could you just run through the parking on there, please? Parking spaces for visitors, residents?
Could I ask for the block plan to be pulled up on screen, please? It's the layout plan. That's whilst that's coming up, I'll just mention in terms of parking, there's a 2-bed property and a 3-bed property. They are modest. They're not. They are single story. They're not big executive houses, but there's sufficient parking, more than sufficient parking provided in terms of the local plan requirements. And there's no objections for highways, but if we just pull the plan up, each house is served by an open carported parking spaces, 2 places per unit. The reason they're open is because they're used daily, so they can be used daily as opposed to having garage doors on. So again, if there's an issue, if anyone in the council's got issues in terms of will those garages be used on an everyday basis, that's what they're designed for. If you want to put a condition on saying they must be retained in that way in perpetuity with no closures on the front, then the applicant would be more than happy to accept that as a condition to make sure they are daily used. Just waiting for the block plan.
Okay.
So I've just put up on my screen. Each property is actually served by 4 spaces. Sorry.
So we've got open carport. Is that 2 spaces per house dwelling? And then there's 2 parking spaces in front of that, I take, so that's 4 per dwelling. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? There are no other questions. So thank you very much for addressing us. And we will move on to questions of clarification for the officers. Are there any questions of clarification for our planning officers? Oh, Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. There were a couple of suggestions from the speakers that the council might not have considered policy LP10 in the report before us. It's not explicitly cited in the inevitably partial list in paragraph 3.1 of our report or explicitly referenced elsewhere as far as I recall, but I just wondered if officers would like to take the opportunity to reassure us that LP10 has been considered in the advice before us this evening.
Thank you. So as set out in the report, Alconbury Weston is defined as a small settlement in our local plan, so LP9 is relevant. And this says that development proposals on land well related to the built-up area may be supported where it accords with the specific opportunities allowed for through other policies of this plan. And then if we just look at in the local plan, the guidance paragraph 4.107, one of those specific opportunities is LP33, which is rural buildings. So officers are of the opinion that the site is well related to the built-up area, having regard to the development to the south. And then we've assessed the policy against LP33, which is a specific opportunity provided for in the plan.
Thank you very much. So it would be fair to say that the lack of explicit reference to LP10 is reflective of the judgment that you've just set out there around the applicable policies rather than an omission in the report. Thank you.
Councillor Niche.
Yep, thank you, Councillor Wakeford. You got some of the way there. Just for clarifying again on the countryside perspective, are you saying because there's already buildings there, and if it was a blank canvas, it possibly could be countryside, but because there's already buildings there, and it's going on to a similar footprint, is that why we're saying it's not countryside?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's the first one. The second question is, I'm sure it'll come up in a couple of other areas. One of the plans you showed the blue line, which I understand is under the control of, but didn't see, is that the remarks were made about that is the part of the drainage plan and the SUDS, which of course is one of the contentious aspects. So is that why the blue line's in there? Because we haven't seen the plans or anything that shows that the drainage is going to go in there. Because obviously with drainage being an issue from this one and dare I say the previous one, which obviously we're not looking at, could we put in the condition which you've marked in there under whichever number it was, not flicking through back to it again, that it's done prior to first slab level or something, although it's difficult because I know there's already building there, but prior to the start of commencement of building, because clearly there's an issue that's been going on with the drainage system, and once you start to build, if it keeps rumbling on, then if something was to happen, we'd still have that issue, and it's better to almost get it done prior to anything being built. So it's just a question for clarification. Could we put that in?
Thank you. So just to clarify, the blue line indicates that that land is also in the same ownership as the site outlined in red, which is the application site. And you're quite right, the drainage strategy does include proposals in the blue land. We're therefore proposing a Grampian style condition, which basically ties the two, the drainage strategy as a whole, to ensure that it is carried out in full.
That's fine. So with reference to the ownership, which is owned by the applicant or whoever at the moment, does that ownership then pass on to, I'm trying to work my mind through of, the agent has actually said that those properties will then take the full responsibility. Well, if they don't own that land, how can they take responsibility on? I'm just working out from a legal perspective how that would actually work in my own mind, just because obviously one of the biggest issues is flooding. So if it isn't, and the issues of how it's maintained, shall we say?
Would legal like to address that? Sorry, would you?
Thanks. Ordinarily, it's the owners have riparian responsibilities. That's enforced by the Cambridgeshire County Council as is the flood management authority to police that and to ensure that that's been adhered to.
And we could.
And we could use a condition in terms of the maintenance of the drainage strategy as part of the application that we've got before us. So we could add that into the condition.
Are there any other questions of clarification for our planning officers? There are no more questions, so we'll move on to the discussion. Who would like to start off our discussion? Any offers? So based on our conversation that we've had so far, are we all agreed that we would like to have a condition added for the Grampian? Let me just, yeah, I'll get
Thanks. As members go into the debate, obviously it's just to be mindful of the opportunity to attach a Grampian style condition to secure a scheme for the drainage. And as the debate moves forward, and again, mindful of the recommendation, please feel free to ensure that is proposed if you're minded to support this application.
Thank you. Who would like to start the discussion for me? Councillor Jordan.
Yes, I mean, I think we've heard a lot about the drainage system, and I'm very mindful that we put any conditions on that because it is a huge worry, and we know how much flooding there has been in the past in that area. So I think any condition that we put on should be done, because I think that was my biggest worry about this, was the drainage and how it was going to be done. And as Councillor Niche has brought up, who has ownership of it after it's all been built. And I think we need very clear guidelines about that, because it is a huge worry. Yeah, but I'm listening to the rest of the debate, I think.
Councillor Dew.
Sorry about this. Yeah, I think before us tonight, we've got a proposal where, as has been said, this Alconbury Western is a smaller settlement and has to be treated as such, and the application seems to deal with the policies that come from that. There are issues of flooding in the area, and I think most of them are relating to runoff flood rather than flooding from the rivers or whatever else. So which is why the area is identified as flood zone 1. So you initially think, oh, it's flood zone 1, it's not a problem, but you have to look at the runoff area, which is why I think the idea of having a Grampian condition on this, if we are minded to approve it, to make sure that what is proposed here, which should do the job according to the various engineers, etc., is put together as part of the condition. So I think it's hugely important that we do that. I'm generally happy with the size and scale of the development, as has been pointed out. I mean, these are quite low-level bungalows. We're not looking at something here that's absolutely massive on the site, and the members were concerned, and I think rightly to a degree, about the parking. And I think we were satisfied with what we heard on that. So if it would help, Chairman, when the time comes, I'm happy to propose that we accept this, put this forward rather for approval with the addition of the Grampian condition as suggested. And I'm not saying other members must follow me on this, but at least it gives us a steer to go on the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dew. Councillor Mockball.
Thank you, Chair. I have to admit I missed what Julie said, and I'd just like to get clarification about what, the drainage being adopted by. I didn't quite hear it, so I'd like to just hear that again. Sorry.
Sorry, as part of any Grampian condition, we can have a maintenance agreement with regards to the long-term maintenance of the drainage parts of the site. So we could include that in the condition wording. That makes sense?
Maintenance being covered by the developer.
It is transferred with the land, but it is actually in a maintenance agreement. On most similar sites are like this, where we had a condition which regards the long-term maintenance of the site.
Councillor Davenport-Ray.
There's one element of this application which I find quite appealing compared to the previous one for the site, and that is the actual size of the houses, which Councillor Dew has mentioned. When we think about the growing, aging population of Huntingdonshire, our housing stock, we need bungalows, and so I'm quite happy to see two of the three as bungalows. And if we're looking for a seconder, I'm happy to be that.
Thank you. Councillor Wakeford and then Councillor Niche.
Thank you. I was flicking back and forth through my local plan, and I think the argument on the basis of policy LP9 as set out in the principle of development section in our report does certainly stack up for me. So that's from paragraph 7.6 onwards. So I was going to agree with Councillor Dew and second, but that's not required. But I'm content, subject to the very important condition that we've discussed, that we can pick up wording from the officers on. I'm certainly minded to support this when we come to a vote.
Councillor Niche.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's the same, really. Looking at my original thought was countryside, and then of course realised it was building sector. So I think it is covered in there. And I think the Grampian conditions that we need prior to commencement of any building, I think is really, we really need to nail that down to prior to commencement so that it covers that other site, which is seriously of concern to the rest of them as well. And making sure that it is tied in properly with the ownership or however it's done with that land that is obviously not owned by the potentially the new occupiers. So it's a scratchy legal issue, I'm sure.
Thank you, Councillor Nish. Councillor McAdam.
Thank you. I personally am always very reluctant to see countryside swallowed up in development. However, with the question that's been asked by Councillor Nish, and looking at on the report 7.33 to 7.35, I am happy that what is going to be represented here in the final development is actually an improvement to biodiversity. With that respect, I'm assured by that, and I believe that actually, from the biodiversity point of view, it's going to be better once the development is undertaken than what it is now. So, thank you.
Councillor Nish.
Sorry, Chair, to come back in. There was one question on the adoptability or non-adoptability, because I'm guessing it's a non-adoptable road that we need to make sure that we get that, whatever they call it, alleviation to cross over and not damage. I don't know what it is. You know the one I mean. The waste removal, so that if we damage it, we get the money back or whatever. No. Help me out, somebody.
Fantastic. Thank you, Councillor Nish. We have a proposal by Councillor Dew and seconded by Councillor Devonport Ray that we approve this application with conditions written up by the planning officers regarding a Grampian style drainage system and commencing before building. So all those that are for that proposal, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 16. That's unanimous. Sorry, 15. That's unanimous, Chair.
So that is unanimous and that is approved with the condition. Thank you very much. We will move on to item number 4 on our agenda, which is the appeals decision. And we will go over to our planning service manager to have that report detailed to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep it brief. There were 3 appeals since last planning committee. All were dismissed. So I've not really got anything in additional to report. Okay.
Thank you. In that case, I want to thank you for all your contributions and thank you very much to our planning officers for all the hard work that you've done for this evening. Thank you very much. And with that, I will bring this meeting to a close.